Have you ever heard of the French bread law? If yes, then you might have the slightest idea of how important bread is for the French. There, bread isn't just bread, it's an entire different world. So let's take a sneak peek into this world and don't be surprised if you get hungry by the end of this video. Bread is a staple food eaten across the world every day by all ages and social class. France wrote the rule book for breads. French people relied on bread for centuries as their main food source. They continue to support the artists who perfect the skill of making beautiful bread. A high quality bread is always respected for being great and not rejected as it is expensive. The first example of modern bread was found in Mesopotamia and Egypt. A baker from ancient Egypt forgot to dry the flatbread dough and left it on a warm rock. The warm weather led to the mixture fermenting and rising. After it was cooked, the fermented mixture produced a nicer taste and a tender texture. The first version of sour bread had arrived. Bread became an important part of the European society. Wheat could be grown with ease across the continent. It was one of the first farm food in existence. When the Romans invented water milling in 450 BC, the ability to supply flour increased. Wheat became an important commodity. It's the Middle Ages where bread developed within the lives of European people. It's around that time that France began shaping its reputation for extravagance. It became a world leader in baking and cooking techniques. Though in the lower class, bread making took place at home, those without an oven would go to the nearby bakery with their dough. They would pay a small fee for it to get baked, putting a unique mark on the loaf as they handed it to the baker so that they knew which one was theirs. The French Revolution. During the French Revolution, the color of bread eaten started to signify a person's social class. Darker bread indicated the eater was lower class, while whiter bread displayed a higher class. The roller mill. In 1834, the first roller mill was invented. Instead of crushing the grain, a roller system breaks it open. It made the work much easier. The introduction of the steam oven. In the late 1800s, the steam oven was introduced in France. Steam baking creates a humid environment where the setting of the crust is delayed. Bread making in a steam oven was soft in the crumb and crisp on the crust. The Polish method. As baker's yeast was introduced to the bakeries in France, it sped up production. But this was detrimental to the flavor and texture of the bread. To combat this, French bakers adopted a preferent technique from Polish bakers who had settled in France. A portion of the flours from a bread recipe is soaked in the same weight of water and a small amount of yeast. The mixture is slightly stirred, covered, and left overnight. During this period, the yeast ferments the flour making in a powerful levain. Once added to the dough, it improves the dough's maturity so the bulk fermentation or first rise period can be reduced. Now, let's take a look at a few different types of bread. The first one being baguette. After the Second World War, in a way to protect their works from overworking, a regulation was issued by the government. It stated bread makers were not allowed to start work before 4 am. This posed a challenge for the bread makers at that time. Getting the first batch of bread baked in time for breakfast became a challenging task. Artisan bread makers came up with an innovative idea. Instead of making the large loaves they were previously popular, bakers made thinner and smaller loaves. A diameter of no more than 2 inches made the production much faster. Bakers could start working at 4 am and prepare bread in time for the breakfast. This bread was called as baguette. These are very hard on the outside but soft on the inside. On 13 January 2018, it was reported that the French president supported the call for the baguette to be recognized by the United Nations as the cultural treasure. Next up, we have bowl. In French, bowl means ball, and this is the shape of the original bread makers would make their dough. Crispy on the outside but soft and chewy on the inside with a golden crust on top, just like baguette. Initially, bakers were more accustomed to making bowls. This is why bread makers in France are called boulangers and the bakeries are called boulangeries. Ficelle, also known as the original baguette. This bread is longer and thinner than the traditional baguette. Ficelle originally had a bland or a mild taste. Now, artisans making ficelle add salt or poppy and sesame seeds. Brioche was bought by Norman people when they settled in France. In the 1800s, they produced a secret recipe for making butter and decided to include it in the bread dough. This is when it was first created. The name consists of terms brie, which means squeezing, and hocher, which means stirring. Unlike other French bread, it is made from butter, eggs, and sugar. Because of this particular bread can be eaten as a snack or a dessert. Last but not the least, we have croissant. In 1920, croissant was officially declared as a traditional French product, even though it was not really French. Croissants aren't easy to make. The dough requires a detailed process called laminating that involves folding and rolling several times, freezing between folds to create layers of butter within the pastry. But it's totally worth it when you bite into the rich, buttery, flaky, crisp result. So, by now, we for sure know how important breads are in France. In 1993, the bread decree, often referred to as the bread French law, was instated. It governed the ingredients that can be used in the bread dough. It states which additives can be used and how many of them are allowed. The regulations are so in place so that French bread can retain its famous characteristics. This law just proves the fact how important bread is for the French. I would like to end this video by a very famous quote, which says, "Bread is like sun, it rises in the east and sets in the west."